Hey, what's up, lightboltjoe here. Today we're going to discuss the 2006 horror prequel film, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre: The Beginning. So we start out in 1939. Woman inadvertently gives birth at a meat packing facility in Texas, and the baby's deformed, has skin problems, thrown in a dumpster. Somebody finds him, takes him home. 30 years later, we're in 1969, so it's 4 years before the events of the 1973 plot point in the '03 film, '03 remake. So this is a prequel to that remake. This is the Platinum Dunes timeline, if you will. Leatherface's name is Thomas Brown Hewitt in this. He has a different name in a lot of different multiverses for some reason, but he's always referenced as Leatherface. Fine. So, 1969, Texas. Jordana Brewster is dating Matt Bomer's character, and Matt Bomer's character has this brother, Dean, and they're about to enlist into the Vietnam War. Dean is going to actually not enlist. He's going to go with his girlfriend to Mexico. And then Matt's character is going to be just going back to Vietnam because he's going back for a second tour. So then, of course, shenanigans ensue. They go to that gas station that's owned by the Hewitt family. Motorcycle gang is then there just hanging out. One of the female motorcyclists is going to then rob them on the highway, and then the group of kids inadvertently crashes into a cow, car flips, the fake sheriff comes about. After we learn how the fake Sheriff Hoyt becomes Sheriff Hoyt, it's because, Thomas Hewitt, therefore, right before the events of Matt Bomer and Georgiana's characters coming to that area of Texas, that small town, the meatpacking plant is closed, the town is closed down, stuff, right? It's becoming a ghost town. And Thomas, aka Leatherface, doesn't want to leave. He enjoys butchering. So he therefore butchers the boss, who tells him he's fired and things of that nature. And so then the sheriff comes to the house, says, "Hey, listen, we got a problem with your nephew there. We got to fix this." So en route, they see him on the side of the road with the chainsaw, and then the uncle gets the bright idea, "Oh, let me just get rid of the sheriff, who's going to be retiring in a week anyway, and then I'll be the new sheriff." That's how he becomes a sheriff. That's how we know him as the sheriff in the sequel film, technically, the '03 backtracking Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake. So this brings about that family dynamic again. This brings about certain aspects. Granted, the kid that we meet in the other film, in the '03 film, is older than 4 years old. So it's a matter of who is he, where was he this entire time? Semantics doesn't really affect the plot. The woman neighbor next door is used as a prop in this. That was very interesting, blocking the door. But it's very gruesome. It's very bloody. It's very gross. Filleting Matt's arms as he's chained to a table, after the sheriff brings them back after that car wreck kind of a thing, after he then kills the motorcyclist. Stuff. It's gross at points, but captivating, because this is a good Leatherface character. He's not screaming, he's not moaning like the other ones. Granted, the first one I have no problems with. Second one was technically a sequel, but then the third and the fourth were just weird spin-offs, if you will. I can't even fathom how the continuation of plot point is relevant. It's like Leprechaun. It's the same basic premise, but some don't reflect the others ish. But what I love about this, and I talked about this in the '03 review, is that the cast is gorgeous. And does that make me a shallow person because I enjoy watching beautiful people? I had to think about this, and because this cast is gorgeous. Jordana Brewster and Matt Bomer are the two main characters, and then they're Matt's brother's character and his girlfriend. The four of them are gorgeous. So when you're viewing attractive people in a horror film, and then they start to get dirty, and then they start to get bloody, and then they start to get beaten up, and then in the 2000s, in the aughts, horror had a very specific aesthetic. It had a very hazy, kind of musky aesthetic, and there was low light, whether it orange or green, throughout, and everybody was wet. That was just the aesthetic of the aughts horror film. If you want to make a aughts horror film a la 2024, that's how you do it. You need haze on the screen, you need low lighting in either orange or green, and everybody has to be wet at some various point. And the '03 film and the '06 film are pure aesthetic aughts horror. Even though they're supposed to take place in '73 and '69 respectively, they have that aughts horror aesthetic. And rewatching now the '03 film, which I've seen the most, and now this '06 film, which I've seen the most on a second basis. Um, I love the aesthetic of the films. I love the aesthetic of the story because it gives us a proper first, second, third act story. And I love the aesthetic of the individuals who are casted to play these characters. So, yes, they might be gorgeous. I don't think that makes me vapid or shallow to appreciate watching a conventionally attractive person be put in a weird situation. You expect a gorgeous person to be in a rom-com, right? You expect a hot guy to be that love interest for the hot girl, right? As standard rom-com has gone for many a decades, right? Now that they're slowly integrating into guy, girl, finally, it's about time. But you look at gorgeous Matt Bomer and you're like, oh, well, he's definitely a rom-com guy. So it's different to see him in a horror setting. That's why he was really good in American Horror Story as well, because you don't expect the attractive person to be being in a horror film. You expect the not so conventionally attractive person being in a horror film. Does that make sense? I'm glad things have been changing. I'm glad that the reverse has been happening. The unconventional individual has been the lead in certain things. But like, I like watching the aesthetic of the individual because I appreciate the aesthetic of the individual, mixed in with the aesthetic of the timepiece of the project. Aughts horror is very specific. You need those three things. You need that low green or red or orange light. You need that musky in the air, and you need somebody to be wet at some point. That's a horror film from the 2000s, and it works. And it's an aesthetic, and it's beautiful, and it brings this nostalgia to me these 20 years later, which I find fun. But I think that's what's interesting about watching these films again, is that you watch them with your friends in the theaters, you know, when they first came out. You got scared, ha ha ha, spooky, right? October 6th, 2006, that's when this film came out. That was my brother's 14th birthday back then. And so, like, watching it that weekend, watching it the weekend after that in the theaters with friends, it just brings a sense of that's what you did at that time period. You're in high school at that time period when you were a teenager. You're doing that with your friends on the weekends. It's Halloween time, spooky season, watch a horror film. But watching it now, 20 years later, you're then appreciating the nostalgia of it. So it's interesting that I'm now in an appreciation of nostalgia time period era moment where I'm viewing things in the aesthetic, when I'm viewing things in the appreciation of the aesthetic, alongside the story, alongside the property, alongside the things that happen throughout the project. I love these 2003 and 2006 Texas Chainsaw Massacre films because it brings me nostalgia, but also because they're very well done. It brings about a very specific stylized aesthetic, both human, story, lighting, costuming, practical effects. It's gross, but it gives you that sense of disturbance. This is disturbing that this cannibalistic family is doing this, leading up to then the events of the 1973 stuff that happens in the '03 film. It's just a good time. I don't know how else to explain it. Nostalgia bliss, bringing me back to my youth, when times were simpler. And yeah, 2006, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the beginning. On to the next review. Mahalo.